because they're concentrating on everything else, and as soon as you speak, that. But if you said at least anything, especially if it had any kind of don't do that or watch out or anything, virtually anything, they reacted to much more strongly than crossing streets, going down steps, blah, blah. Wow. Because we are so afraid of what?
Disappointing.
Embarrassment.
Doing something wrong.
Embarrassment. It's the all of us. And that's one of the reasons people don't want to do things. How many people are afraid to go ride the public bus simply because they don't know what to do? And they're afraid they're gonna look like idiots because they don't know where to put the money, where to set.
Where to get off?
Yeah, I'm serious. And it's the same thing here. So you've got to get people through that, and you've got to understand that that's what drives people. And I mean, some of you guys are looking from the standpoint that you've been messed over by teachers before and forced to do things you don't want to do. But you, especially Tim, Kate, you're different. You're unusual cases. You're people with early onset losses. You're not the typical case here. You're 2% of our people here. You're 2% of the population. You're not the 95, 98% of the people you're going to work with. And you have to respect, obviously, people who come to you with kind of experience that kids like you who come out of high school have. And this whole system is absolutely designed for people who lose vision, not for people who come through it like you guys did. So you're bound to have stronger prejudice for it than most anybody else. And it's good, but you also have to keep remembering that you're not the type case. So you have to look at this pretty broadly. That's not a criticism, it's a fact. Okay, so we had an assessment of eligibility criteria, we had an assessment at the program level, we had this three-step assessment at personal adjustment level, then we get to a lesson where we have another assessment, and then in the lesson we got 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 more assessments. What are they?
Monitor progress?
That's it. I teach something, did they learn it? Can they push the right button? You say, okay, we're going to work on the play function here. And in order to know whether the play function works or not, whether they did it or not, you have to find out. You have to have them do it. Then you know you can go on. If you just say, do you know where it is? You haven't done any assessment. You've asked them, and they're always going to say, yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. So we got to know. Now some things are so simple that you can watch and figure it out. Some things you have to ask. But you can't go on to the next step till you know the last step is work. It's simple. But you got to do it. I'm telling you, you've got to not think about how you've been taught in the last whatever number of years you are old to come into this field. You got to open up your mind, think about a whole brand new way of teaching. Okay, so we're going to talk about the program assessment in more detail when we get to the planning part of this course. So we're going to skip over that. So now I want to talk about the three-step VRT assessment. So now we stop talking about this case file summary, this case file assessment. So, boy, you're lucky that things are electronic nowadays, because I used to be able to bring some files in here that were 4 inches thick and were not organized in any way. They'd have paperwork about this, that, the other thing, and they'd all be single sheets. And if you can even imagine that if that was plunked down on your desk on Friday, let's say like You work at the center over here. 10 new students are coming in on Monday, kaplunk. Here's 30 inches of paper. You go. You got an hour to look. Well, now at least you have using electronics, but still, it's a lot of stuff usually. So, in order for you to put that into any usable form, then at least you need to come up with some kind of a form to summarize it on. So we have this so-called case file summary report, summary form. It's this thing on it. It's figure 3.1 there. Let's go over the parts here real quick, and then we'll read that one. In essence, it's just a history. It's just a history. And we break it up into these categories just so you can separate it, so you don't get this big mess. I'll say the contents of the file are, first off, obviously you got personal characteristics, age, marital condition, where they live, that kind of thing.
So you can ask the person if he or she is married?
You don't get this, I'm telling you, this is a case file form.
Right.
This comes to you before you ever see the person.
I'm sorry, but I meant in general, is that is allowed?
That's a good question. It does come to you, so I'm not sure what the law on that very question is. It comes to you, so it must be.
Okay.
But I'll have to ask because I'm at least 2 years behind on that question, so I'm not positive. What else might you find in there that might be useful to you?
Vision history?
It describes the person. No, I'm talking about the personal characteristics, the description of the person.
Maybe the age,
Yeah,
Race.
yeah, well, maybe.
gender.
Occupation?
No, there's a vocational history. Sometimes the size of this person can tell you things.
Oh.
Did you
Height,
say the
weight,
size?
Hmm?
You said the size?
Yeah,
whether they're morbidly obese or not.
yeah, that. The second thing is eye history or vision history. That tells you all the stuff that relates to their former eye exams, acuity, left eye, right eye, both eyes, their visual fields, whatever their visual impairment is. Sometimes a bit of stuff about functionally what they can and can't do. Normally not much about function though, almost always just sheer numbers related to acuity and distance acuity, near acuity, etc. We're going to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of these categories too, so hold on with your questions if you're going to ask about the weaknesses. Of course, there's things like color blindness and such as that also in that vision history. And then the next one is medical history. And that would tell you obviously about other disabilities. Again, that may be a different question these days too. I'm not sure. However, if it shows up in a medical record,
Excuse me.
on a physical exam that is in your record, remember, you now are not just, you are now an official with, you're not just the average Joe anymore. You now have privacy rights and responsibilities related to these files. So medical history relates to lots of things, and it can tell you, usually, if you see things like heart congestion, other disabilities that lead you to think about, maybe I ought to worry about the physical part of what we're doing right away in the beginning, just until I figure out, what this person really can and can't do, that kind of thing. Or if you see, for example, I've had clients who had kinds of seizures that would make them black out and fall down, blam, right where they were without warning, which is not real cool when you're on stovetop frying. So that kind of thing comes from medical history. Educational history. Always the greatest, well, this and IQ are the greatest predictors of success in rehabilitation and every other form of life success. But don't be prejudiced by it. It only means that most people who have more education tend to learn better. That doesn't mean it's true, though. It means that as a group it's true. And the opposite is true as well. It doesn't mean that if you have somebody with little education, obviously they can be as intelligent as the next person. And obviously the educational history tells you a lot about what this person knows and doesn't know as well. What was their major? What are their interests? Then vocational history. What were their jobs? What kind of work have they done? Again, what might their interests be? And then rehabilitation history. Have they had any services in the past? And if so, what are they, and are there reports? And then lastly, testing history. Sorry. Testing history meaning psychometric testing history. IQ test, vocational interest tests, that kind of thing. You see fewer of them than you used to. You still see things like some that relate to psychiatric disabilities, or you see some that relate to personality inventories that may warn you, against to worry about certain kinds of behavior, etc. Okay,
I have
now.
a quick question. Under testing history, you have down there low vision evaluation. Why would, pardon?
That's not true. That'd be up in the eye, usually. They could be here. Depends on if, actually, this form is just put together, and you can stick stuff wherever you want to stick it. So, low vision testing could be here. This is just a form we put together to help consolidate things. So, however you decide to use it is how it will be. Because what you're going to get is never something cute like this. You get just this big file that has all this stuff in it, these forms that you have to put together and summarize, and this form that I just gave you is a good way to summarize.
Okay.
Okay, let's talk about the strengths and weaknesses here. There's a lot of things about these case files that are very weak and you can't trust. What are they? Let's say, what might you see? What might it be in the medical or vision history that probably isn't very trustworthy because do you really think these things, you think that the physical was just done last week and and all these things commonly are really dated. And even if they're not, even if they were done last week, by the time a person gets to you, this stuff may not have any truth to it. Especially those vision history, medical history, marital status, even up in those things change. So you have to worry about datedness, and you can't look at these things as concrete truths. So when you get to your interview, you really have to take some of this with a grain of salt. And you can't go right in there and say, oh, for example, under medical history, real commonly you'll see the person is presently on this medication or that medication. Well, this is, but you can see what was the average time. We did some research a few years ago. I don't know what it is now, but the average amount of time it took to get somebody into rehab services from the time they lost vision at that time was, guess what, in Michigan? How many months?
6.
18. I don't know what it is now. I'd be surprised if it was any better. So a whole lot can change in that time. And a whole lot can change from the time the assessment's done, the program assessment, until the time a person gets to you. So this dated business, you really have to watch it, and especially something like medication. God, 18 months later, if somebody was on an antidepressant or something, it's not likely they're still on it, right? People don't stay on those things for years and years. So datedness is a big problem. How about recording bias? You know, I skipped one. I skipped something. There's something called social history that I didn't announce here. It should be right either before or after rehabilitation history. It's called social history.
It's not in the notes, but I see it in the book.
Huh?
It's not in the notes, but I see it in the book.
Yeah, I messed up here. I skipped it somehow. I'm gonna add it right now before I forget it. Okay, so social history, I should mention, basically is usually a story about this person's, written by a social worker or a counselor, about this person's living situation, what kind of support they have in the community or from the family, how they're getting along, and just kind of a general description of what's going on in their lives at the moment. Maybe even some information about how they feel about themselves and their vision loss. So now, back to these possible problems with case files. Number one, datedness. Number two, bias. The recorder's bias. Whoever wrote this stuff's bias. Obviously, social history is the greatest place for this. So if you get somebody who's a social conservative writing this compared to somebody who's a social liberal, what do you think you're going to get if this person say this person doing methadone treatment to get over heroin addiction? You're going to get an entirely different viewpoint from one kind of person than you are from another kind of person. You really have to read with an open eye these kind of files because they're raw. with bias. And you can see it a mile away. Judgmental statement. It's enough to make you want to go look up whoever wrote it. Because the social history should have no kind of a judgmental statement in it. It's factual. The person said this, and this, not I think, or it appears the learner's feeling like this, or whatever. But you hear all the time, especially if the particular client individual has some sort of social problem that somebody can blame them for. I mean,
You don't do something like based on observation,
well,
da-da-da-da?
you should, but I'm telling you what, is everybody perfect? I'm just telling you, when you read such things, you just keep your eyes open for bias.
I think even with the best intentions, if you've just spent an hour with someone who has a really complex life and a big history and a lot of colorful stories, it's all you can do to sit there and write that down or type it or whatever you're going to do and objectively put it in a file. It's a
Right.
huge challenge.
Right. And, social workers are trained to do it. But it's a difficult task. And we do have our biases, whether we know it or not, so. What we need to do is be able to look at them and see them. We're gonna read these files in a second here, so you can get a feel for it. Sometimes you see bias in where else would might you see it, in which other headings there?
Medical.
Now, what bias there?
Like the doctor will, like, let's say the person is getting rehab services, but they're on like SSDI. Like the doctor basically says, well, a person can't work because
You
you're
got that right. That's a very good one. Or, there's nothing else we can do. There's nothing else we can do for this guy. He's done for. That's real common. That's a very good one. Any other ones in here you think? You'll see it in the rehab history too sometime.
I mean, I imagine you could see it anywhere.
Well, you can, but
Vocational
it's not.
history.
But it's most harmful you can look at, I don't know, vision history. What can you say there?
Yeah.
But it's hurtful in some places, and it's primarily the social history, the rehab history, the medical history. Probably they're the most. In rehab history, the bias comes obviously because wherever somebody writes a report, and one that doesn't require measurements and numbers, one that requires people to write narrative reports, that's where you see it. And rehab history has that kind of thing too. And it's based on how well people write. How well people write evaluations. You'll see evaluations that say, well, something like, today we worked on the Sony digital tape recorder. He did well. That's nice. You have the foggiest idea what that means, or so there's all kinds of that. The last one that is always taken with a grain of salt is that testing history, especially psychometric testing. Most of those psychometric tests, including IQ tests and interest inventories and all those things, are really aimed at people with vision. So even though sometimes they're adapted to vision, certain parts are left out or whatever, but I'm talking about things like who gives these tests and when they're given. Where would you guess these kind of tests are given in the rehab process, generally? At the very beginning. Is that the best time to test somebody's IQ and somebody's vocational interest and all that when they are so confused they don't know if they can spread butter? No. And the people who give them usually are not folks who have experience with people who are visually impaired or blind. So I don't pay a lot of attention to the psychometric tests. They just don't have a lot of relevance. They can have relevance if they're done at the right time by the right people. But you need to look at when they were done, by whom, etc. Okay, so let's read through 3.1 there. Somebody read it aloud so everybody who can see it can at least hear it here so we can talk about it.
The case
Some
file
of these-
summary form?
Yeah, some of these biases or whatever as we go, and we just kind of judge them. It's not the form, it's the filled out one, right, for Miss H or whatever?
Yeah. Judy.
What page is it?
28.
Page 28. And if you don't have a book, please get close to someone who does, or just listen up, it'll be read.
Just start with the visual impairment history. That's the first thing that's listed.
Yeah, because we don't, I don't know, does it have personal characteristics? It doesn't?
Yes, it does. Name is Judy H. Address is 235 4th Avenue.
Yeah, you don't need the address, obviously. Go after that. Read after
I
that.
misunderstood you. Okay. Visual impairment history, the cause.
Gotta do it louder though. People on the screen can't hear you, I'm sure.
Okay, visual impairment history. The cause is diabetic retinopathy and vitrectomy. Age of onset, diabetes, age 10, retinopathy, age 23. Prognosis, progressive, further decreased probable. Acuity, distance is left eye 20/200.
That's right, I have.
Knew that too. Right eye is 20/200. Left eye is 20/400. The near acuity in the right eye is 20/100, and the left eye is 20/400. Counts fingers, 1 foot, and it has comma left. I'm not sure what that means. Counts
Left eye, I
fingers, 1
assume it
foot.
means-
Pardon me?
I assume it means left eye.
Okay.
So any comments about that? Anybody?
Well,
So how can you have an acuity of 20/200 and counts fingers at the same time? What does counts fingers mean? Does anybody know? The lowest acuity you can
Fingers
have.
at so many feet.
You know what the lowest acuity you can have? Motion detection. That you can, if I'm, the doctor will shake his hand across, or her hand across in front of your face. If you can't detect that, you don't have motion detection. The next thing they try to do is get you to count the number of fingers they have in front of your face.
Uh-huh.
So if this person can see 20/200, that counts fingers has zero relevance.
It doesn't make sense.
No. You see what I mean?
Because counting fingers is like a lot easier than some people.
No, it's way worse. They wouldn't even do it unless a person was almost stone blind.
Okay, that's what I got you.
It's a contradiction.
It's like having two acuities there.
Yeah, that's what it really amounts to. This person really must have lost some vision and then they just didn't correct it, the report. The left eye must really be a lot worse.
So like hypothetically, somebody could modify a report, like say a year ago they had 2400, then today they come in and like hypothetically, when they update the file.
No, you wouldn't do that because
No?
these are signed by doctors.
Okay.
No, you really wouldn't do that. I mean, you could do that in your record, in your summary, I guess, yes.
Right, Dr. State's visual acuity is now.
Yes, yes, of course.
Okay.
Okay, somebody want to read?